Early on the morning of September 29, 1982, a tragic medical mystery began in Chicago with a sore throat and a runny nose. A medical mystery that sparked widespread panic across the world. With countless deaths piling up across the city, police quickly pieced together the cold, calculating plan of the Tylenol Killer. Mary Kellerman, a 12-year-old 7th grader at Addams Junior High School in Schaumburg, and lived with her parents Dennis and Jeanna Kellerman in Chicago's northwest suburbs. She loved horseback riding and supplemented her income by babysitting for neighboring kids after school. On September 29, 1982, Mary awoke early in the morning feeling sick with a sore throat and runny nose. Knowing she had a long day ahead of her, she took an Extra Strength Tylenol to help her ease her symptoms. At 7 a.m., Mary's parents discovered her unconscious on the bathroom floor and rushed her to the emergency room. Doctors battled to save the girl who was failing fast. By 9:30 a.m., she was pronounced dead. Her death was initially mistaken for a stroke, something almost unheard of in children her age. On the same day, tragedy struck again. Adam Janis was a 27-year-old postal worker, living just a few miles away from Mary and her family in Arlington Heights, Chicago. He was married and had 2 small children. That day, Adam had called in sick to work feeling under the weather, with what he described as a throbbing headache. Instead, he took the chance on a rare day off to take his children to school. After dropping them off, he stopped at a grocery store and bought a bottle of Extra Strength Tylenol. Back home, Adam took the bottle into his bedroom and swallowed 6 Tylenol capsules. Almost instantly, he collapsed on the floor and fell into a coma. He strolled into his bedroom after swallowing 6 capsules, fainted, and went into a coma. He died shortly after at the Northwest Community Hospital in the emergency room after desperate attempts to revive him. Northwest Community Hospital's Intensive Care Unit's medical director Thomas Kim said, "Our first job is to resuscitate, and we couldn't even do that. His heart just would not resuscitate. I assigned Janis out as probably cardiac death. I was talking to his family, trying to explain what had happened. It's hard even if you know the diagnosis. I was trying to tell them we didn't know why. Adam's wife Teresa was there, his parents were there, and a whole slew of other people, and they didn't go back to their home. They went back to Janis's house in Arlington Heights." Adam's family gathered at his home in the hours after his death to mourn the young father and begin making funeral arrangements. While visiting with his family, Adam's brother, Stanley, and his wife Teresa complained of headaches brought on by the stress and pain of the day, and looked into Janis's bathroom for any painkillers. Upon finding the bottle of Extra Strength Tylenol that Adam had brought just hours earlier, they each took a couple of capsules. You can see where this is going. For the 3rd time that day after taking the Tylenol, Stanley and Teresa both passed out just minutes after taking the medicine. The pair were rushed back to Northwest Community Hospital along with other family members who had been in the house. Dr. Thomas Kim, who had worked on Adam just hours earlier, said, "As I was putting on my blue blazer to leave around 5:30, a nurse told me that they were bringing the Janis family back. And I said, well, it's probably the parents because they were feeble, and they might have been very upset. And the nurse said, no, it's his brother. I had been talking to this 6-foot healthy guy and I said, well, what happened? Did he faint? And she said, they are doing CPR and they are working on his wife too. Doctors initially suspected that there was a carbon monoxide leak in the home. Just like before, things were not looking good for the couple. Whilst this was going on, Chuck Kramer from Arlington Heights Fire Department called Helen Jensen, a public health nurse for Arlington Heights, and said, there's something going on here. We had a death this morning and now we bring in 2 more from the same house. And they want a public health person here. And you're the only public health person I know. So she dropped everything and went to the hospital. At 8 p.m. on the 29th of September, Nurse Jensen and police officers arrived at Adam Janis's house in Arlington Heights in hope of finding the cause of what had happened to the family earlier that day. Investigator Pichot said, I was expecting to walk in the house and go, oh, there it is, but it was nothing like that. Jensen looked and didn't see anything that could possibly be a contaminant. After searching the home from top to bottom, Nurse Jensen found a bottle of Tylenol with 6 capsules missing. In my mind, it had to be something to do with the Tylenol. And of course, there was no protective sealing on this or any over-the-counter drugs. They just had cotton tucked in there. So we went back to Northwest Community Hospital. We took the bottle with us. Back at the hospital, Stanley and Teresa were given their last rites. Stanley died hours later at 8 p.m. Teresa survived another day, but things were looking bleak. After carbon monoxide was ruled out as the cause, doctors struggled to treat her. not knowing what the cause of her sudden illness was. 2 days later, Teresa was pronounced dead. She never woke up after collapsing when she took the painkillers. As if 3 deaths in one day weren't enough, another victim would soon be discovered. 27-year-old Mary Weiner was happily married to her husband, Ed, and the pair had recently just welcomed their 4th child together into the world. On the morning of September 29th, the very same day as the other tragic deaths, Mary was experiencing some postpartum pain and decided to take some painkillers. Extra Strength Tylenol. Just like the other victims, after consuming the capsules, she quickly passed out. Mary's 8-year-old daughter, Michelle Rosen, was present and witnessed her mother collapsing on the floor. Shortly after, Mary's husband came on the scene. He later said, "We were together for a long time. She was an excellent mother. We had 4 children. The baby was a week old. I came home right after she had fallen on the floor. An ambulance came and rushed her to Central DuPage Hospital in Winfield. I'm not going to say a whole lot more than that." Mary was quickly pronounced dead upon arrival. Her death left Ed Rayner in mourning and her 4 children, including an infant baby without a mother to raise. Over the next few days, strange deaths were being reported thick and fast across the city, with panic growing across hospitals and police departments across the city. Mary McFarland, 30, was a single mother raising 2 young sons whilst working at the Illinois Bell in Lombard, Chicago. On the 30th of September, she began to experience a severe headache. Mary took Tylenol in the back room at her workplace, and you know how it goes from here. According to her brother Jack Eliason, she went in the back room and took I don't know how many Tylenol, at least 1, obviously, and within minutes, she was on the floor. At the time of her death, Mary McFarland was survived by her 2 sons, Ryan and Bradley McFarland, her parents, John and Jane Eliason, brother Jack Eliason, sister-in-law Nancy Eliason, and siblings. Mary also later had a granddaughter she never got to meet, who was named after her. Paula Jean Prince was a 35-year-old flight attendant working for United Airlines. On the morning of October 1st, 1982, she flew from Las Vegas to O'Hare International Airport. On her way back from work, she stopped at the Walgreens on 1601 North Wells Street and bought a bottle of Extra Strength Tylenol, as she felt a cold coming on. The transaction was recorded by an ATM surveillance camera. As she prepared for the evening ahead, exhausted from a long journey, she took a couple of capsules, hoping she would feel better in a few hours. Her body was discovered the next day in her home, with an open bottle of Tylenol on the bathroom counter. Paula's sister was scheduled to meet her for dinner that night, but she didn't pick up the phone. When her family was unable to contact her, they contacted the Chicago Police Department to do a welfare check. On the vanity, the Tylenol bottle was still open. She took it in the bathroom and was dead by the time she reached the door's threshold. Who hasn't relied on Tylenol or a similar brand to get them through a headache, a cold, or other aches and pains? None of the victims had any idea of the danger they were in when they opened the small bottle. Many similarities were found in the deaths of Mary Kellerman, Adam Janis, Stanley Janis, Teresa Janis, Mary Reiner, Mary McFarland, and Paul Prince to ease minor symptoms. They all turned to Tylenol, a trusted, safe, and common over-the-counter medication, and they all died. 2 firefighters, Elk Grove Village's Richard Keyworth and Arlington Heights' Lieutenant Philip Capitelli, were the ones who first suspected the Tylenol capsules were to blame, the root cause of so many deaths. They told Dr. Thomas Kim, the chief of critical care at Northwest Community Hospital, about their suspicions about who raised it higher up the chain. The deaths were initially attributed to natural causes or carbon monoxide poisoning. They began to feel there was something else relating to the deaths of 3 Janis family members after they died. Investigators noticed an almond odor in the bottles after it was discovered that each of the victims had taken Tylenol shortly before their deaths. Cyanide has a bitter almond scent to it. It was at this point in early October of 1982 that investigators made the connection between the poisoning deaths and Tylenol, the best-selling non-prescription pain reliever sold in the United States at that time. The gelatin-based capsules were especially popular because they were slick and easy to swallow. Unfortunately, each victim swallowed a Tylenol capsule laced with a lethal dose of cyanide. In the gas chambers of Auschwitz, hydrogen cyanide was used to murder over 1 million people. Meanwhile, potassium and sodium cyanide are soluble, ingestible crystals. In a mass murder-suicide in 1978, potassium cyanide was famously mixed into a flavored punch and drank by over 900 members of the Jonestown cult. Not all cyanide applications are as sinister. Gold mining, pest control, and electroplating, the process of coating a metal with a thin layer of another metal, all involve cyanide. When used as a murder weapon, though, it doesn't take long for the body's destructive effects to manifest. All of the victims died as a result of potassium cyanide poisoning. According to post-mortem examinations, none of them stood a chance at 1,000 times the deadly dose. When cyanide poisoning occurs, the deadly chemical disrupts the electron transport chain in the mitochondria of cells, preventing the body from producing ATP from oxygen. Depending on the amount and kind of exposure, the person's central nervous system and cardiovascular system can fully shut down, resulting in death within minutes. The 7 victims of the Chicago Tylenol murders each took a capsule carrying a deadly amount of potassium cyanide. 6 of the 7 victims died within hours of taking the cyanide-laced capsules, and all of them perished within 2 days of taking it. Because all of the modified bottles came from the separate manufacturing sites, it was discovered that the Tylenol capsules had been tampered with after manufacturing. Investigators came to the conclusion that the criminal tampered with the Tylenol bottles after they were placed on store shelves. According to the investigators, the criminal grabbed Tylenol bottles from store shelves without purchasing them, loaded the capsules with potassium cyanide, and returned them to their original location for customers to purchase. There were no clear fingerprints on the modified Tylenol bottles and no CCTV footage of the places where the poison capsules were purchased. Because the medications were made in several pharmaceutical facilities, the bottles were tampered with by retailers. In the weeks or months leading up to the incident, police believe the perpetrator may have stolen bottles from local retailers and replaced the Tylenol with cyanide pills. Each pill had a deadly dose in it. The unusual circumstances, along with the heinousness of the act, sparked panic across the Chicago metropolitan area. Tylenol was pulled from store shelves. Police used loudspeakers in the streets to broadcast warnings against taking the medication. People flocked to nearby hospitals, panicking that they had fallen victim to the horror and blaming cyanide poisoning for a variety of ailments. Control lines for poison were inundated. People who needed Tylenol on a regular basis were without it and didn't trust other brands either. Johnson & Johnson's early response to the developing disaster will go down in history as a brilliant public relation response. Johnson & Johnson developed a strategy team with 2 questions to solve as soon as the poison capsules were discovered. How do we protect the people? And how do we save this product? Consumers were warned not to take any Tylenol products after marketing campaign. A 1-800 number was set up to directly handle frightened client calls, as well as media line for discussion with reporters. All bottles were ordered to be removed from store shelves. Following the discovery of 2 more poison bottles, Johnson & Johnson issued a nationwide product recall, urging all customers to return the medication for a full refund. They promised a reward of $100,000 to anyone who could identify a suspect. Following the concern, they began using triple seal packaging on Tylenol. 5 poison bottles were lethal in all. 3 were detected during the recall and did not result in death. The recall cost the corporation more than $100 million. In the absence of a credible suspect, Johnson & Johnson emerged as another victim of the crime and a hero. Despite the positive coverage, Johnson & Johnson wasn't completely blameless. The family sued Johnson & Johnson, claiming that the pharmaceutical corporation should have been prepared for product manipulation. The relatives of all 7 fatalities reached a settlement in 1991 for an undisclosed sum. A portion of the settlement would be in the form of annuities to pay the college cost of the victims' 8 children, according to the settlement. Police were desperately searching, trying to find the person or persons responsible for tampering with the product and had not much luck, until Johnson & Johnson got a letter demanding $1 million to stop the killings, which read, "Gentlemen, as you can see, it is easy to place cyanide, both potassium and sodium, into capsules sitting on store shelves. And since the cyanide is in the gelatin, it is easy to get buyers to swallow the bitter pill. Another beauty is the cyanide operates quickly. It takes so very little, and there will be no time to take countermeasures. If you don't mind the publicity of these little capsules, then do nothing. So far, I have spent less than $50 and it takes me less than 10 minutes per bottle. If you want to stop the killing, then wire $1 million to bank account number 8449597 in Continental Illinois Bank, Chicago, Illinois. Don't attempt to involve the FBI or local Chicago authorities with this letter. A couple of phone calls by me will undo anything you can possibly do." The police discovered the man they were following was James W. Lewis after tracking him across many states and under numerous identities. Lewis had gotten away with murdering and dismembering a 72-year-old man in Kansas City in 1978 because he wasn't read his Miranda rights at the time of his arrest. He'd been dealing with various sorts of extortion and fraud since then. Lewis was sentenced to 13 years in jail for threatening Johnson & Johnson, and following his arrest, he provided investigators with specific plans for injecting lethal quantities of cyanide into the capsules. However, Lewis has always maintained his innocence in the Tylenol pill poisonings. When questioned about the drawings, he claimed that he was merely trying to be a good citizen by providing authorities with comprehensive drawings demonstrating how someone would inject cyanide into Tylenol pills. In a 1992 jailhouse interview, Lewis told the Chicago Tribune, "I could tell you how Julius Caesar was killed, but that does not mean I was the killer." Despite the fact that Lewis was the main suspect, officials were unable to locate any direct evidence linking him to the crime. On October 27, 1983, he was found guilty of extortion. In 1995, he moved to Boston after serving more than 12 years in prison. Lewis escaped a rape and kidnapping trial in 2004 when his alleged victim refused to testify. Lewis was still being investigated by the FBI in 2009 after they raided his home in February of that year. As of today, James Lewis is still the #1 suspect in the mind of the public. Hundreds of copycat poisonings followed the hysteria of the Chicago Tylenol murders in the years that followed. Despite the fact that these murders were not committed by the same perpetrator, who murdered 7 individuals in 1982, the victims of copycat crime should be remembered alongside the 7 victims of the original crime. A killer who planted poison in reliable products took 7 lives randomly. It was a horrible attack that claimed the life of a toddler, killed 3 members of the Janus family, killed hard-working Chicagoans, sparked widespread panic, spawned copycat killers, and forever transformed the way food, pharmaceuticals, and other ingestible things are packaged. Following the Chicago area killings, Tylenol set the norm in food and medication packaging, but the crimes made tamper-resistant packaging a mainstream and legally mandated safety requirement. In the aftermath of the Tylenol scare, laws were enacted. The laws enacted after the original crime were later used to convict copycat perpetrators. A woman was recently jailed for licking ice cream and returning it to the shelf in a supermarket shop. She was apprehended and is now facing charges of food tampering, laws that would not have been passed if it hadn't been for the Tylenol scare. Each safety seal, childproof cap, and piece of anti-tampering legislation honors Mary Kellerman, Addams Janus, Stanley Janus, Teresa Janus, Mary Reiner, Mary McFarland, and Paula Prince's lives. Their deaths ensured the safety of everyone who survived the Tylenol scare, and their names must not be forgotten. While nothing can bring back the lives lost, it may be reassuring to remember that these fatalities spurred a shift in how society views medications and food tampering in general. As a result of these deaths, we learned about the dangers of food tampering and developed practical prevention methods. The Tylenol murder case continues to draw attention even after 38 years. Despite the fact that this crime occurred in Chicago, it is a worldwide concern. 7 people were killed in a cold, deliberate homicidal act in Chicago, yet this crime could have happened anywhere. The indiscriminate choosing of the victims, as well as the knowledge that it could have occurred to anyone, is maybe the most terrifying aspect.